My name is David Byrne. I'm the new artistic director here at the Royal Court, and this is my first downstairs piece of programming. So thank you very much. I could not be more delighted to introduce you to Margaret Perry, who is the playwright and adapter of this evening's performance. And of course, the director who needs no introduction, Katie Mitchell. So, what we're going to do in a minute is I'm going to open up to audience questions, and I think we've got a roaming mic that's going to go around and pick up anything you'd like to ask Margaret or Katie. But what I thought I'd do to kick us off, and while you're thinking of questions, is I have written down 4 questions that I would like the answers to. And the best thing about doing Q&As is it means that I can ask questions that would be slightly too sort of bald to ask sort of outright, but it gives me a chance to sort of get the answers from them. So hopefully these will open up a really interesting conversation for us this evening. But my first question is for you, Margaret. So, adapting Bluets for the stage, a lot of people, when I spoke to them about this idea, were like, that is so theatrically exciting as a proposition, but feels like an almost impossible task for a playwright. So, as a playwright, where did you start? What was your process working with Maggie Nelson's text? Where did you begin?
Yeah, it was. A friend of mine said that he told his aunt that Bluets was going to be adapted, and he asked her. He hadn't read it. He asked her, did she think it would make a good play? And she just said no, which just really made me laugh. But yeah, I think it is a really challenging text to adapt. And I began by typing up the beautiful book in its entirety, because I wanted to have the kind of rhythm of the language, and I wanted to make notes of my own impressions of the book, fresh, sort of the parts that moved the most, the parts that felt the most narratively kind of gripping or exciting.
So that was actually literally typing through the book?
Yeah.
So sitting with the book and transposing it through?
Yeah, I had my copy, like I've loved this book since I bought it, I think, in 2010, 2011, and I had my copy from then, like, open next to me, and I typed it up. Yeah.
What was that experience like? Did that give you a deeper insight into the text? And
absolutely. I mean, it got me into the rhythms of Maggie Nelson's words, and it sort of, I guess I got to like sort of process the book through doing that. So that, and then also you have a copy of it that you can search. It's very handy when you're like, what's that line that I need? So yeah, sort of both a practical and a kind of literary task. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I began by doing that, and then I kind of did a read with my head and a read with my heart. So the head read was sort of like, where's the action, where's the drama? And the heart read was, where are the places in this book that move me the most, and that also feel like irreducibly the book, that sort of are the kind of most iconic, most beautiful, the very, very heart of this text. And obviously maybe adaptation is a lot about taste, so maybe someone else, like if someone else adapted this, they might choose different bits, but those were the bits that I sort of gravitated towards. And then I took that text and I broke it across 3 speakers, because Katie and I had agreed that it would be 3 performers. And in doing that, the kind of form that you've seen tonight of the sort of consciousness of one person represented by 3 performers kind of emerged.
Fantastic. So my second question is also straight to you. So adaptation, and particularly something that has such a strong voice, I suppose, is about finding a sort of hybrid between someone who is adapting it and someone who has such a reputation, I suppose, for inventing sort of form and having such a strong voice of your own. Mm. How did you find that balancing act of Maggie's text and what you wanted to do with it as a piece of theatre and as a text, separate in its own right?
Well, I think my goal was to try and render the experience of reading Bluets into the experience of watching Bluets. And I think sometimes that means you're making more radical interventions than simply placing the book line by line on stage, because actually you're trying to recreate the experience and the feeling. And to do that, sometimes you have to make more changes than you might imagine. And I think the other thing that really helped was, probably fans of the book noticed that there's some text in the show you've just seen that isn't from Bluets, and that's from an earlier book by Maggie Nelson called Something Bright Then Holds, which he wrote around the time that these events were happening to her, that she was having this heartbreak and that her friend got in this accident. And that is a sort of much more, in places, more narrative, and the feelings are more hot and the sort of events are more current. So I used some of that text basically to, I guess, embed this, sort of lift out the story in Bluets, which sometimes I was worried would be lost. Because when you read Bluets, you feel like there's so much text about her friend, for example, but then when I was adapting, I found that actually the amount of text we have about that the friend was too small and I was worried that it would be lost in the adaptation, So that was really useful, and Maggie Nelson was like very keen and sort of helpful with saying, here's an earlier book of mine, like pick from there, use some text from that book as well. So that was one thing that I think really helped to drive the narrative. But was that the question?
Yeah, that's really insightful. I just wanted to get you talking, and
yes,
it really has.
Yeah.
I suppose right from the beginning of this project, this has always been like a really close collaboration between sort of playwright and director, sort of bringing the sort of unique form of this play to life. Can you talk about, I suppose, how you work together through the writing process, so how you work with Katie through the writing process to sort of achieve the text that has delivered the performance we've seen this evening? And then I'll ask Katie the same question, but the other way around.
We worked really, really closely from the beginning. So Katie brought the book to me as a proposition to adapt, and initially I tried to write into the live cinema form, which I'd never worked in this form before, and that was quite challenging because I think I didn't completely understand what it could do until I got into the rehearsal room, to be honest. And so then we decided together that I would write the thoughts inside this woman's head as she's going up across this period of 3 years, but not what was happening to her, what she was doing or where she was while she was having those thoughts. And then Katie and I decided those things together at a later stage in the process. So we did like 20 drafts, a lot of drafts, back and forth.
And Katie, so what was your process in terms of working with MAP, I suppose, delivering this through?
Well, I suppose we had a conceptual idea that it would be one woman's consciousness represented by 3 different performers playing 3 different strands of thoughts. And then after the attempt to do live cinema didn't work out so joyfully, and that's as you say, just not knowing what the form could do, then it was very much focusing on that interior thought narrative, wasn't it? And then that was a lot of micro noting and conversation. Should it be thought A saying that? Should the line be split there or split somewhere else, etc.? So that was quite sort of detailed work between the two of us, passing drafts to and fro. And then when that process was completed, then we started to work on where the character would be and what the character would be doing, e.g. would the character be in a car or be in their office or be at the hospital, etc. And so we started to work on the live cinema film layer of it. And that came much later on, didn't it, when all the thoughts had been sort of stabilised.
And we decided we would find the character in the moments of her life when thought tends to creep in. So like right before starting work or on her way somewhere or just before she falls asleep or when she can't sleep in the middle of the night. So there's obviously a lot of her life that we're not seeing, her sort of busy life as an academic, her other friends. So we really kind of focused in on those moments, didn't we?
And we focused on the banal. Because often the biggest sort of existential thoughts we have in life happen at really banal moments, like when we're on the bus on the way home or just before we go to sleep. So we wanted it to be very untheatrical, just the banal details of everyday life.
So obviously staging this show in rehearsals is needed to be very exacting, with you leading the creative team through a very precise process to realise a show as technically rich and sort of artistically ambitious as this. As a director, at what point in your process did the details of that theatrical gesture come into focus for you? And how do you work and make that vision possible with the actors and your creative team?
Fortunately, we were able, weren't we, to actually rehearse in the theatre. So when we were rehearsing it, we had exactly what you see in the performance. We had all the lights, all the sound, all the video cameras and the screen. And where you're sitting, we had, over here was Grant G, who was doing the video work, and he was like the director of photography of the film. And then over there were sitting Paul and Tida, who were doing the sound and music. And then someone called Ant, at his desk over there, was doing the lighting. And then 2 fantastic assistants who were running up and down onto the stage. And so I suppose we worked technically right from the get-go. So there wasn't a rehearsal process and then a technical process. We started right from the beginning saying, so at this moment you're going to pick up the marble. Emma, you'll pick up the marble, you'll move it to your eye, hold it there for 3 seconds, and then whilst that's happening, Kayla, you'll be saying this line of text, and then you'll all be putting the marble down. So it was that mechanical right from the beginning. And I think that was very challenging for the performers, who were remarkable. to go through this technique. I mean, really remarkable artists. So it was just very mechanical, very technical, right from the get-go.
I'm going to open up to audience questions now. For any directors who are watching this on YouTube, only Katie Mitchell gets to rehearse her full rehearsal process in the auditorium. If you ask your question, I will ask it back so we can sort of hear it. What's the most important thing, Katie, when you're directing actors?
All right, cool. Well, it just depends in what form. So, if it's live cinema or naturalism. So it would be two very, very different things. So if I was working without the cameras and without the live cinema, then there would be 6 things that I would be asking the actors to do. I would be asking them to work on time, place, the immediate circumstances, what's happened just before the scene, the character biographies, events and intention. So I'd have these 6 things that we would be discussing all the time. So that would be for naturalism, but for this weird form of live cinema, I'd be inviting them to become like conceptual collaborators to help build a bit of really complex cinema technology, whilst also doing very detailed acting. So I think it's a very different invitation. And I was definitely leaning on a lot of fantastic film acting experience in the making of this. So I think that's the main thing that I would be leaning on for the live cinema work.
Why did we choose live cinema as the format?
Yeah, I suppose because the novel is a really sort of fragmented object and is all about the interior of experience of one woman's mind. So it would be very boring, I think, if we chose a theatrical form of the monologue, where it would just be someone talking a lot. So live cinema is great for getting inside someone's head. So it seemed a perfect match between the material, which is interior landscape of a woman's mind, and the form, which invites you into that interior landscape. Or maybe doesn't, depending on what you feel.
Let's take a question from, let's go to that person there.
How you made the decisions on where to splice the lines across the 3 performers. When did you think, oh, this is definitely going to work?
Yeah, there was a number of factors that went into those decisions. I think initially on the page, I was thinking about 3 different types of thought, so sort of an obsessive strand, a distracting strand, and a depressive strand, and so that kind of naturally dictated the bits of text that each actor got. But then in terms of splicing the lines, a lot of it was instinctive. I mean, there's one line that springs to mind when they say, Emma says, "That's my depression talking, that's not," and Ben says, "Me," because it is just kind of delightful to feel, oh, that's a new voice that's saying that, and that sort of felt, that's kind of on an instinctive level. But yeah, and also I guess it was sometimes about the sense of the line and making sure that was clear. It was sometimes about form, like when they say dip articles separately, felt fun to give those 3 words to the 3 actors. And also in moments in rehearsal, it was about who could get to the microphone as well. So that was and the other rule that we had that was really exciting in rehearsal was that we discovered that in order for the form to work, whoever was on the camera couldn't be speaking. So we're watching a face have a thought, and we're hearing a different voice say that thought. So that was another thing that dictated the splitting of the lines. That's quite a lot of different things, but yeah, all of those.
There was a wonderful frisson in the building because of the way it was put together. Staff were sort of coming in and sort of sitting up in the circle of the balcony, sort of watching rehearsals as they unfold. And because of the way it was rehearsed, we only ever saw like small sort of moments of it. So you would sort of maybe see a 40-second chunk of it, and you'd see sort of a glimmer of what the final show would be. And I had people sort of coming in and out of my office about 4 weeks saying, like, I've seen half a minute of it and it's looking incredible. And it created the most sort of incredible, sort of positive and sort of excited atmosphere throughout the building of people seeing the show slowly come together and to see those sort of chunks being made as they were sort of built in the theatre. So I think from the staff team, we always sort of had a sense that something really special was being made. As a director, do you have a moment where you think, like, this is actually going to cohere to my vision, or this is going to complete? Or is that not something you think about?
Yeah, I don't think I have a vision. That's quite a big thing, isn't it? No, I would just have like sort of conceptual parameters, and so the aim would be here, are we going to be able to have 3 wonderful performers to convince the audience they're just one person? But I don't think there's a moment where you think this is going to work. Even watching tonight, I'm thinking, is it working?
So I'll repeat that a little bit. So how do you... I suppose it was a question about how, I suppose, you put on a play for the living in a time of extinction? And how do you balance the values of sort of environmentalism, which obviously Katie has a big reputation for, and the creation of work?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I often ask myself that. And I suppose this is quite a small live cinema show compared to what we've been doing in Germany. In fact, one of my colleagues here from Germany, from the Hamburg Schauspielhaus, will tell you this is minor, isn't it, compared to the scale of what we make. So definitely the environmental imperative has downsized live cinema. So we're looking in a much less tech-heavy, unbelievably, version of it. And where actually a lot of the equipment is rentals. So there is quite a sort of strong wish to put the two things together, but they don't fit together. And I really welcome your challenge about that. And it's something that I need to think about. And often myself and the team working on the live cinema work, who also work on the environmental projects, we often wonder whether we should continue with the live cinema or not. But this is our smallest version. We've tried to get it as small and tiny as we possibly can, because I don't think all of the big shows that we made in Germany and some in the UK are proper any longer because of the environmental crises we're all facing. So it doesn't quite fit together, and thank you for reminding me to think more carefully and deeply about that.
Let's take another question. I'm going to go right down the front here. Here at the Royal Court, obviously, we're looking at plays that influence the now. What about this play speaks to now for both of you?
I think heartbreak is perennial, and I think pain is perennial. And I think there's something about, for me actually, I remember having this clear feeling when me and Katie were first speaking about adapting this book, that there's something about the hierarchy of grief that her friend expresses so beautifully, that she is able to hold Maggie's pain about her ex wearing a blue shirt that he wore for her for someone else, while she is literally paralyzed and experiencing extreme pain. That moved me so much. And I think we're in a moment in the world where there is so much pain around us all of the time, and it's only getting bigger and worse, and we feel helpless every second about it. And I think there's something about this book that creates a holding space for that pain, even though it is never directly about everyone's pain, because no book could, but it's about one woman's very specific pain that somehow manages to fan out to the universal. And that's how I feel about it. That may not be how everyone, of course, feels, but yeah. What do you think, Katie?
Oh, well, we wrestled about this.
We did,
I drove
yeah.
you mad, because I kept asking myself, why do Bluets now? This is because I think for all directors, it's the key question. It's not what you're doing, it's why you're doing it now. And I really hear your position, and I really welcomed it. But I'm not sure I quite got to the bottom of why do it now. Other than to say, I suppose, rather like yourself, I think that there's so many enormous events going on around us, unbearable events going on, both with the wars and the environment and the elections. But sometimes all our sort of private griefs get sort of set aside in some way. We don't give space or time to really address them. And I think what Maggie Nelson is saying is that a lot of space is given in literature and art to men to talk about their tiny griefs and despair. And her book is saying, why don't we give a bit more space for women to put in the centre their own griefs and despair? So I think there's a feminist and political agenda in the book that hopefully our production is having a conversation with. But I'm still not satisfied that I fully answered that question. So it's such a good question. Thank you.
What are the barriers and benefits of telling a story based on someone's experiences? Margaret, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Well, one barrier is that there's no invention, really, and the words are the words. And that was always the case for adapting this book. It was always Maggie Nelson's words only. And there's maybe one word that I've added. I added the word enthusiastically, if anyone noticed that. But otherwise, all of the words that you heard are words from either Bluets or Maggie Nelson's book, Something Bright Then Holds, that I mentioned. So I think that is a barrier in some ways as a writer, but it's also a benefit because you sort of have all this wealth of story and experience to work with. But also you have to be sensitive as well about that. And I spoke a lot, like Maggie and I had a good back and forth, and she did find initially, she found it hard to have this book adapted. I mean, it's about the most painful time in her life. She said that, has said that in interviews, and you can see it, you can read it. And I think having me, someone she's never met, who wasn't there, who didn't know her friend, who hasn't lived any of this, filter it through my own experiences and my own lens was painful for her. But we got through it and we talked about it, and I think in the end I hope she's happy. But it was hard at times, but yeah.
So what were our thoughts on casting, and was it linked by, was it obsession, depression, and distraction?
Well, the cast were cast before/during the process of writing, so it was more about bending the lines to who they are than the other way around, where you write a play and then you know who's going to be in it. But I guess Katie can speak to casting more than me,
Very
possibly.
much, Margaret. We were both involved, though. I suppose we were very conscious of wanting to represent a female presenting character in a very sort of dynamic way, and not to do it only with female presenting performers. And so that was something that was really important, but we didn't want to sort of like put it into the actual landscape of the writing, but we wanted to just rest it there in terms of who we cast to play the female presenting character.
Royal Court is not a theatre that is known for adaptations. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your process of programming this work. Why did you make such a program?
Absolutely. I mean, actually, the Royal Court does have a long history of sort of adaptation in various different forms. So I would say, even recently, like for Black Boys, I would say is sort of a piece that touches on something else. I think during Vicky's time, like Let the Right One In, or even the Twits, would have, a link to the adaptation, and that goes sort of right the way back. I think there's a big question around what our relationship with adaptation is with our writers, and it's a very active question at the moment. Coming in as a new artistic director, a lot of the plays I'm being sent by writers that I'm really excited about working with are adaptation, because I think adaptation has become quite the sort of mainstay of commercial theatre, or sort of theatres across the country who are using that to sort of bring in audiences, and I suppose are bringing that as like a more commercial prospect to something. I think the Royal Court is one of the few places where you can do something sort of truly original, and therefore I think we've got a responsibility to look away from adaptation to a certain extent, but I think also sometimes adaptation unlocks a piece of art or something that has a relationship to something else, where actually it has its own artistic heartbeat, and actually adapting something somehow makes it almost less of a commercial prospect and actually more of a sort of passion project for the artists involved. So I suppose it's like a continual sort of conversation, but it's something that I think we're trying to work out where that sits in this context. And actually in 5 years' time, the context of that might be very different. I mean, the context of adaptation was, I think, very different in like the 60s and 70s than it is now, but it is sort of a very live conversation around where that sort of sits, and what is adaptation and what isn't, what becomes like an original piece and what doesn't, and where that sort of root sits. But I don't think there's any hard and fast answer to it, if that makes sense. But for this, it just felt like this was something that theatrically, I mean, I think I said to you early on, it's like this book felt like almost a recipe for theatre. And being such a huge fan of Katie's work, I could see exactly how this would bring together some of the forms that Katie has been really pioneering and actually take us to some sort of new ground where it sort of absolutely is delivered on. So actually it was sort of irresistible as a piece of programming for like the theatrical potential that it sort of had. But yeah, it's a constant conversation about where adaptation sits and where text sits. So if we were going to adapt any other book and why, I'm going to start with Katie. Is this naughty of us to ask?
I don't know. It would be very. I'd want to do The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, and I've calculated that it takes 40 hours to read the whole thing, and that it would be very good to do it as a live performance that would happen at an art gallery, maybe, or even in a theatre.
Where
we would do a performance of the whole of Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex to review the relevancy and not of the book, given the fact that it is the most important, biggest book written by a woman about gender politics. But obviously a lot of it is out of date, but some of it is really spectacular. And then if not that, I've got a long list. Rachel Cusk, Deborah Levy. There are lots of fantastic, more radical, experimental female writers, Claire Louise Bennett out there, who it would be fantastic to hear their voices inside the theatre, but obviously not in a way to crowd out any new plays. I'm looking up to the question about adaptation at all. But yeah, but That's me.
Oh, God.
Margaret?
What a hard question. The book that I first sprung to mind is this book called Gillian by Hallie Butler. I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's an extraordinarily funny and biting look at how we exist in capitalism, told through the story of a 25-year-old disaffected temp worker in a sort of medical facility and her sort of very enthusiastic 35-year-old boss or like superior. And it's just, it's very un-Bluets, but it's absolutely hilarious and beautiful and underread. And I think adaptation is a lot about wanting to hang out with a book, you know? And I think that's a book I'd like to hang out with. And then also, I would love to adapt Simple Passion, Annie Ernaux, which I read a lot I reread for Bluets as well, but it's already been made into a film. So, yeah.
Thank you all so much. I have to say, that was a whole list of questions and not comments, so you can all come again. Thank you so much to Katie. Thank you so much to Margaret.